What is up, guys? Rick Kakis here, and today we are going to be examining all 4 of the different javelins or classes within Anthem, discussing what each one brings to the table in terms of abilities, ultimates, melees, and movement to help you guys decide which ones to unlock first, which ones to play the most, which ones to main into the end game. Because while there is nothing wrong with trying each of these out for yourself and then deciding later, you're going to get more class-specific drops when you're playing that certain class or javelin. So you really want to pick one and stick with it if you want to get a viable endgame build quickly. Now, a couple of quick things before we start. Firstly, some of the gameplay is from the Anthem World Premiere, hosted by EA Game Changers, and EA did provide for my flights and accommodations, full disclosure. Also, if you want to support the channel, consider checking out the brand new Anthem-themed merch that just went live. The gold foil stuff is only available for a few weeks. Alright, so let's get started with the first javelin you're going to unlock, the Ranger. Now, even though you're going to play the first couple of tutorial missions as the Ranger, once you reach level 2, you're given the option to unlock any javelin you want. The Ranger, I believe, is one of the most underrated classes right now because it was shown off first, because it's the default class. A lot of people are looking past this guy, but you really shouldn't. It's an incredible, versatile javelin, and its skills offer a pretty darn good balance of detonators and primers. Now, that's something we're going to mention several times in this video, so I thought I would explain it in a little bit more detail. Essentially, you have skills that either do none of these things, they just do raw damage, or you're going to have primer skills. These are going to be things like cryo grenades for the Ranger, and they're going to prime enemies by freezing them. Primed enemies can then be hit with a detonation skill and combo for much more damage. So in that same example of throwing a cryo grenade, freezing a bunch of enemies, you can then hit those enemies with a seeking missile for the Ranger, detonate that cryo explosion, and again do much more damage than normal. Now, something else interesting about the Ranger is that its melee ability, which is an electric mace, is the only one that primes targets. All of the other javelin's melees will detonate them, so you can inflict an electric effect, and your teammates can detonate that, or you yourself can detonate that as the Ranger. Now, speaking of combos, each different javelin has a special effect that happens when they detonate a combo. For the Ranger, it's critical target damage. So when you detonate a combo with the Ranger, you're going to inflict more damage than normal to that detonated target, and therefore the Ranger is going to be extra deadly against taking out powerful singleton targets. Moving on from there, its ultimate ability is a missile salvo, and this is one of the best features of the Ranger, I believe. The missile salvo is incredibly easy to use and very effective. You simply activate your ultimate, and it's going to target more enemies or just the same big enemy, and you'll see a little icon where it's using up more and more missiles. If you open it really quickly and then use it, it's just going to shoot a few. If you hold it open, it's going to shoot much more missiles, so that's something to know. But again, it just locks onto targets, shoots a bunch of missiles, fantastic for clearing out groups of ads or against bosses. And lastly, in terms of skills, we have our support gear. For the Ranger, you can either choose between a bubble that protects you from incoming damage, great to revive people, or a bubble that increases your gun damage when you shoot out of it, great for an offensive build. Now, when talking about the mobility of the Ranger, it's really in the middle of the javelins. It's not going to be as quick as something like the Interceptor, but certainly it's going to be faster than something like the Colossus. It does have access to a dodge, so you can either jump, dodge, or in mid-flight you can barrel roll once to the side, and it's just a great class for getting around, darting into cover at a very reasonable pace. Now, moving on from there, we have the Storm. Now, the Storm has become a fan favorite, and for good reason. It's a really cool javelin. In terms of its skills, you are going to have a lot of primers. In fact, the most primers out of any class in the game, and you're not lacking really in detonators either, although you definitely have a little bit less. And that means you're going to be able to trigger your own combos a lot of the time, which is great if you're playing solo or if your allies just aren't around at that exact moment. Now, your melee is a detonator, that's pretty normal actually, but your ultimate is both a primer and a detonator. It triggers its own combo, and therefore you can get a lot of damage out with it. Now, The Storm's ultimate is basically making different elemental meteors fall from the sky. You're going to have shock, fire, and cryo all falling. And unlike the Ranger's missile salvo, this one you have to aim yourself. Now that can be great because you can make the ice meteor fall one place, look over to another group of ads, make the fire meteor fall another place. You can spread out your damage very, very easily. But because it is manually triggered and there is an animation that goes with it, I've definitely seen enemies just move out of the way while those elemental meteors are falling. So ease of use, not as good as the Ranger, but potential damage output maybe even a little bit better. Now, your combo effect for the Storm is AoE spread. So you're going to spread that elemental effect to other enemies. So if a bunch of enemies are frozen, then you detonate those frozen enemies. Nearby enemies that aren't frozen will then become frozen. So that's what the Storm does in terms of its passive combo triggering ability. In terms of your support, one of my favorites is Wind Wall. This puts up a literal wall where you can shoot through, but enemies can't shoot you through. Great for reviving, damaging bosses, and more. You've also got Quickening Field, which is going to make your skills recharge faster. Great with the Storm. The Storm is very much focused on its skills. You're going to be using your skills much more than your weapons, whereas compared to the Ranger and some of the other classes, you are using your weapons quite a bit. Now, in terms of mobility, practically the Storm is almost identical to the Ranger. Instead of a sprint, you hover, but it's basically the same thing. You fly around as normal. You have one essentially dodge ability, but instead of just actually dodging like the Ranger, you're going to kind of warp through time just a little bit to the right or left. And if you're flying, you can mid-flight dodge and you're just going to warp to the side instead of rolling to the side. The one big difference, however, in terms of mobility is the fact that you can hover almost indefinitely with the Storm. So the Ranger can hover for a bit, definitely get some damage out, but then he's going to plummet to the ground. The Storm can stay up in midair with a great view of the battlefield, causing havoc, lighting everything on fire, or freezing enemies, or whatever your equipped skills are. And while you're hovering, you're also going to gain a protective shield. So you want to be hovering as much as possible with the Storm, casting your abilities down on enemies. That's a huge positive. You get a great view of the battlefield, and you're harder to kill while you're up there, but you have literally no cover. You're in the middle of the air. So sometimes ads can overwhelm you if you're being a little bit too overzealous with your hovering. Now, moving on from there, we have the Colossus. And firstly, one of the big differences with this Javelin is that you have no shields. Instead, you have one big health bar. So with the Ranger and the Storm, you're going to be able to take damage, that's going to lower your shields, then you can hide behind cover and regenerate your shields. But if you take too much damage in terms of your shield, you're then going to start taking health damage. The only way to recover your health is to go out and get repair drops, the red health drops that come from enemies. So you have to kill enemies, go out, and actually physically pick those up to regenerate your health. But again, the Colossus just has health, but he has a lot more health than the Ranger and the Storm. In fact, he has more health than the Ranger and the Storm have health and shields. So you can tank quite a bit of damage, but the only way to heal yourself is to be playing relatively aggressively and to get those repair pickups. But let's talk about its abilities. The Colossus does have a few primers in terms of flamethrowers and firewall mortars and stuff like that, but mostly it's going to have detonators. So it's a very detonation heavy class. If your friend is playing a Storm, you may want to pick the Colossus. They work very well together. The Storm priming and you detonating. In fact, it has one of the best detonators, which is just its melee attack, the Heavy Smash. You smash the ground and create a big AoE damage effect. Any enemies within it, if they're primed, are going to be detonated. And in terms of its combo effect, it's AoE Explosion. Explosion which damages nearby enemies. So you're going to cause an extra explosion to inflict extra damage every time you trigger a combo. Now, moving on from there, its ultimate is the Siege Cannon. This basically makes you whip out a massive, almost like a Fat Man from Fallout, a massive handheld tank, frankly, and you get 3 rounds to absolutely decimate ads. It's very, very good against singleton targets and multiple targets. You do have to aim it, and it is definitely possible to miss. In fact, the bullets don't go exactly where you aim it sometimes, so something like the Ranger, again, ease of use in terms of ultimate, it is key there. Now in terms of its support abilities, you've got Battle Cry, which is going to make enemies aggro onto you, and Shield Pulse, which is going to reduce the damage inflicted on your allies. Both great options for a tanky character. Now let's talk about mobility, because the Colossus really lacks that. You're not actually slower than any of the other classes. The Colossus and the Interceptor and the Storm and the Ranger are all going to fly and sprint at the same speed. But you've got no dodges, none whatsoever. In fact, instead, you've got a shield that you can bring out, and that shield can tank some damage before eventually breaking. You're gonna have to wait for it to recharge, and then you can take it back out again. So if you're being targeted by a sniper or there's a homing missile, whereas the other classes would dodge to avoid that, you actually have to take out that shield, tank that shot, and it'll just lower your shield's health. You'll be unaffected in terms of health. And then that's essentially your version of dodge. Now the thing is, in a lot of combat scenarios, being able to have a shield and tank incoming damage is sometimes better than dodge, so that's something to be aware of as well. Now one more unique feature of the Colossus is that it can use two different gun types that other Javelins can't. Autocannons, which are essentially spin-up miniguns capable of inflicting more damage close range than something like an assault rifle or a light machine gun, and grenade launchers, which can inflict a splash damage and other weapons simply can't. Now moving on from there, the final Javelin we're going to look at is the Interceptor. Now in terms of abilities, frankly, it's kind of lacking in both primers and detonators. This class does not get a ton of either. It certainly still does have both. You can trigger your own combos, but you have to use pretty specific skills. Where it does really excel is melee damage. Now we've talked about the melees with the other classes, but the Interceptor's melee is unbelievably powerful and often will output more damage than not only your guns by a lot, but often your skills as well. So with the Interceptor, you often find yourself simply running into the fray and mashing melee, whereas the other classes take a lot longer to melee. If you're playing Colossus, for example, you smash the ground. You have to wait, smash the ground again, wait. Like, there's definitely a recharge period on those abilities. The Interceptor doesn't have that. You can mash melee and it'll melee as fast as you can basically mash it and inflict tremendous damage. And the melee is also a detonator, and so often you find yourselves detonating stuff just by running in with your melee. Now speaking of detonations, your passive combo effect is Aura. Essentially, if you trigger an ice combo, so if a bunch of enemies are frozen, you run in there, melee them, combo pops up, you do a bunch more damage, you're going to get an ice aura around you, which means that just by simply being near enemies, they over time will become frozen. Great for a melee character who's right beside enemies already. You're meleeing a guy and suddenly he's frozen and he can't even attack you back. Fantastic. And for your ultimate ability, you're going to whip out dual daggers and go to town in terms of melees. Your melees are going to do a little bit more damage than your normal ones, and you're going to be invincible. Completely invincible, so you can run in and start meleeing the crap out of whatever enemy with no worry until that ultimate runs up, of course. Now, although this is awesome and it does a lot of damage, there's also a lot of utility to it. You can use this, become invincible, and revive allies with no worry, or complete objectives with no worry either. Now for support abilities, one of my favorite for any of the Javelins is Target Beacon. You throw a beacon at an enemy and that enemy takes increased damage. Great against bosses or any powerful enemy out there. And in terms of mobility, Interceptor has the most in the form of its triple dodge. Like I said, with Storm and Ranger, they can dodge once, forward, to the side, whatever. With the Interceptor, you can dodge 3 times in a row. So it's simply hold the dodge button and you will go dodge, dodge, and dodge again. You can cover a great distance with just dodging, not using up any of your jets for flight. And you can also dodge forward, then dodge to the side and to the side again. You can dodge forward to the side and then forward. You can dodge forward to the side and back. You can change the direction you're going, so it's unbelievably good for getting into the fray, meleeing a bunch of guys, and then, oh, I'm taking too much damage, jump up and dodge away. Now you've covered enough distance and, winded around corners even, that you're safe. So, those are all 4 of the available javelins within Anthem, and a look at their abilities, passives, and mobility. In terms of which ones should you pick if you are a certain type of player, well, essentially, to really simplify things, the Ranger is the jack of all trades. It does everything well, but doesn't necessarily excel at anything. The Colossus is the tank. Play this guy if you like being in the fray, getting into enemies' faces, because you will need to in order to regen your health, but it can take a lot of punishment. Then we've got the Storm. This is the caster, the guy kind of in the back of the fight, just laying down the law in terms of damage and abilities, and also does require a lot of timing and communication to get all those combos off effectively. But then we have the Interceptor. This is the melee focused class, and I would argue one of the highest risk, highest rewards classes to play. It doesn't have that much health for a melee focused character. The Colossus is way more survivable, but you're still able to inflict a ton of damage, and if you're a talented player who can utilize its mobility well, you will stay alive. And so, there you have it. I hope this video will help you make your decision about which javelins to unlock and play. And if it has, please remember to support the video by simply liking and especially sharing. If you want to see more Anthem content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. And if you guys want to keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at @RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.